Welcome to the Tech for Good podcast. This is the HR Tech for Good series. Mother, father, we've made it. We have the one and only Matt Alder, the original podcaster. How are you today, sir?
I'm very well. And thank you for having me on your podcast. I don't normally do video podcasts, so I'm having to really concentrate to make sure that I'm looking at the camera.
Matt, for anybody who doesn't know you or hasn't heard your podcast, can you give us, in your best American elevator pitch, who you are, what you do, and what your podcast is about?
Sure thing. So I'm Matt Alder. I run the Recruiting Future podcast. The podcast has been around for 5 years. I originally started it to talk about the future of recruiting. These days, we talk about anything to do with talent. So talent acquisition, HR tech, talent management, learning development, kind of cover a whole host of topics, but the key theme is always innovation. And I do 2 shows a week, and I always seek out people with interesting stories to tell. So thought leaders, practitioners, people that you may have not heard from before, and try and bring them to the widest possible audience.
Long time before I started podcasting, I was listening to you. You must have had nearly 1 million downloads by now.
Over 1 million.
Wow.
That's heading to 1.5. Heading to 1.5.
There you go. Big guns. I remember 7-8 years ago, you were talking about chatbots changing the world and the likes. It's the innovation thing is really interesting. Do you change subjects so often just because you exhaust a certain subject matter?
What I try and do is at the beginning of every year, I'll sort of pick 4 or 5 key themes for that year, sort of depending on what's going on, and obviously have to respond to events that happen. So last year is a classic example of things not going quite according to plan when we got to March. But to be honest with you, they're always quite broad themes, and they're always very similar because we're on a long journey when it comes to technology and recruiting and technology and AI in HR. I first started working in this industry back in 1999. And I'm not going to do the maths to work out how long ago that was, but it was quite a long time ago. And my first job was all about bringing internet technology into recruiting. And in some ways, some of the themes and topics we were talking about then are still very relevant today. So, I tend to talk about things like automation, marketing, branding, and all the issues around talent and the future of work, how companies get talent, how they develop talent, how they retain talent, how they deal with particular economic and talent market trends that are happening at the time, and also what is the future of work and the future of our industry is gonna look like, and how is technology going to help us get there.
And Matt, when did this podcast become your full-time job? When did it take over everything?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I'm in year 6 of doing the podcast, and I suppose it takes a while to build up any podcast, and I think that's perhaps a kind of a mistake or something that people, when they start podcasts for the first time, don't realize just what a long game podcasting is. It takes a very long time to build an audience. So as I say, in the 6th year of podcasting, it was kind of around about 2018 that the podcast started taking up maybe the majority of my time. Moving into last year, it was 80, 90% of my job, and that's very much the plan this year as well. So it was a kind of a long slow evolution into where I am now with it.
Good for you. And how does somebody get on your podcast, and what does that look like?
Yeah, good question. I am always looking for people with interesting stories to tell. Probably the thing to flag up, though, is 80 to 90% of the guests that I have on the show are practitioners in the industry. So there are people who are working for an employer, doing the work and have stories to tell about the challenges that they're facing and how they're overcoming them. The rest of the podcast is made up by vendors doing interesting things and thought leaders from outside of our industry who I think can bring some interesting perspectives into the talent world. So from a practitioner perspective, I'm just looking for people with interesting stories and people who've overcome interesting challenges, people who are using technology in innovative ways, people working in all kinds of different industries, all over the world. So I think actually finding guests is probably the part of doing a podcast like mine that takes the most time.
And when you started doing the podcast, what were the key challenges that the HR tech community were trying to solve? Have they solved that 6 years later? What does it look like?
Yeah, so I mean, some of the things that we were talking about on the early shows were things like the use of mobile and the use of social media and how they were gonna sort of change recruiting, and they've obviously become very much mainstream, and I think caught up in much broader issues around talent acquisition. The economy was slightly different back then, so we were talking about how difficult it was to find candidates, and in some respects we're still talking about that because there are very many industries where there are still skill shortages and all those kind of things. So it's kind of an evolution. We're still talking about a lot of the topics we were talking about a few years ago, but things have moved on, things have become more mainstream, new challenges have happened. If you go back 5 or 6 years, the use of AI and automation in recruiting was, it was almost a bit of a pipe dream. It wasn't something that was happening. We were debating the implications of it, but we were debating from a perspective of not knowing what it would look like and how it would work. And certainly in the last 2 years, we've seen that happening in practice, and we've got a much better sense of what artificial intelligence, automation, and these kind of developing and emerging technologies look like and how they're affecting what we do.
Are you fearful for the future with AI, or are you hopeful?
Interesting question. And that's the kind of question I normally ask people who come on my podcast, basically. So I think it is encouraging that there is now so much debate about the implications of AI in our sector, in terms of everything from bias to job loss to job creation to whatever that looks like. And ultimately, these technologies are just technologies, and it's down to how we as humans use them to solve business challenges, how we look at the advantages they might bring while guarding against the disadvantages and the dangers. So I'm always optimistic, and I'm always a great advocate of technology, and I think that technology has brought us a very long way, particularly in recruiting, but also in other aspects of HR in the last sort of 2 decades. And I think it will continue to do that. Now, every new technology will bring with it a debate about its efficacy, about its use, about its ethics. And I think that as long as an industry we're prepared to have those debates and have difficult conversations and ask difficult questions of some of the vendors bringing these technologies on, then we're in a good place.
What are the key things that people are trying to solve right now? From my very few podcasts that I've done in this space, bias keeps coming up. Is that the key issue in this year?
Yeah, I think it's one. I think it's a massive issue in kind of every aspect of what we do, and I think it's interesting to see the potential of technology to help to solve some of the problems that we have with bias. And I think I've had some really interesting conversations with some of the CEOs in particular of technology companies on the show, talking about that. But I think the issue is that technology is not the silver bullet that is going to solve the bias issues that we have. These are human problems that are created by human beings, and I think awareness and discussion, and also leadership is the key to solving dealing with issues of bias, increasing diversity, increasing inclusion. These are things that need accountability within leadership of companies to be able to happen. And technology can be a facilitator to help that. And it's been really interesting to see technologies that are coming out, but it's a much broader issue than just technology. And I think if we talk about it as a problem that technology is going to solve, we're not going to solve it, and we're not going to get anywhere.
Your podcast, The Recruiting Future, what do you think the future is of agency recruitment?
Future agency recruitment. So people have been asking me this question since about 1999. So if you go back over 20 years, the internet was going to come along and fundamentally kill agency recruitment. Obviously, fast forward 20 years, and that's not happened. I suppose my answer to that is the answer that I would always give, and it's all about value. I think that agency recruitment needs to bring value to the table, whether that's candidates that are impossible for employers to find for whatever reason that might be, or real value and expertise about the particular industries that they're working in. So I've seen some had some great relationships with agency recruiters. I've seen companies have some great relationships with agency recruiters where they really add value to the process. So I think that's been the case with agencies and technologies for a long time, and I think it will continue to be the case. But it must be all about adding value to employers, and adding value to hiring managers, and adding value to talent acquisition functions.
So we've just been through a pandemic, which was not much fun, but it has been kind of fun for some technology providers. It's fast forwarded things. What are the key things do you think it's changed in HR tech?
I think it is that sense of fast forwarding. I think one of the best examples I have that sums that up is I suppose towards the end of last year, I think we might have even still been in lockdown, so maybe it was towards the middle of last year. I had the HR director of a Scottish law firm on the show, and he was talking about their use of video interviewing to recruit future talent lawyers. And he said that as an HR director, he'd always had a battle within his organization, that there was a perception that the best lawyers do not use video to communicate. Now, obviously, what happened in the pandemic is their entire law firm is having to use video to communicate on absolutely everything, absolutely everything they do. So it kind of blew that out of the water, and there was a real understanding that video could bring value. He started using it in the recruitment process, and very much sees that as something that will continue. So it's this kind of fast forward in terms of attitude to technology. So, this time last year, most people probably hadn't even heard of Zoom. This time this year, they're talking to their friends and family on a daily or kind of weekly basis. So I think the biggest shift is kind of in terms of attitudes to technology and what technology can do for us. Where I think we are, though, I think it would be wrong to say that, it's just massively accelerated HR technology and recruiting technology, and we're off to the next stage now, because that's not true. Because for many organizations, although they're using technologies for things in the talent space that they've not used before, they might not be using some of the specialist technologies that are available. So I've seen lots of companies who, basically death by Microsoft Teams, and, not using some of the excellent, video recruiting or learning development, learning platforms or talent management platforms that are out there that are specially crafted to help people, save time, save money, be more efficient, and really enhance the communication within a business. So I think that there is still, whilst people have made that leap forward in terms of realizing that technology can do things, and people are prepared to use technology to do lots of things that people thought they might not have been prepared to do, there's still a lot of catch up to go in terms of educating the market about some of the very, very specific talent technologies that are out there, and how they can actually bring a lot of value to an organization. And that's where I think we are. I think it's very easy in our industry to look at the large companies, the innovative chief people officers, the innovative heads of talent acquisition who are doing amazing things, and thinking that is the norm for every organization, and it's absolutely not. So I still think that there is a lot of kind of evolution to go on, but we have undoubtedly made a massive leap forward in terms of where we were just 12 months ago.
So what's interesting about you, Matt, is that you've spent years following the people that you've interviewed. So you will have heard the greatest pitches, how people are going to change the world, and like all the stuff that is going to be hard to get out of it in this interview. But if I was to put you in the shoes of, you're the founder now, and you've got this great idea, and you've got maybe a technical co-founder, and you're kind of at an MVP stage.
Yeah.
What do you do? How do you go make yourself a billionaire? How would you go about it?
Well, if I really knew the
from
answer
lessons
to that,
learned,
then I would have, I would have done it. And I've got one failed tech startup behind me.
Okay. So what would you do?
however, what would I do differently, or what do I see? What do I see people doing? So I think let's kind of stick to sort of recruiting and talent acquisition as the example here, because I think that there's lots of innovation, and there's also lots of people who come into the industry from outside of the industry, saying that they can solve problems, and I personally think that's a good thing, not a negative thing. So what tends to happen is people will come up with a piece of technology that solves a particular problem, and then get absolutely or they think solves a particular problem, and then get absolutely obsessed that is the biggest problem talent acquisition professionals have. So it's often down to the way that people position and market and sell their technology. So they will do that on this massive problem that they solve, and how well they do it. And I don't think they're always empathetic about their target audience and their target audience's priorities, but also the sheer number of technology companies that are vying for, share of voice, share of attention at the moment. So having, spoken to people on kind of both sides of this, you get very enthusiastic founders who really just want the world to use their problem, and to want the world to use their solution and solve this problem for good, and they're evangelical about that. On the other hand, you have heads of talent acquisition who, huge amount of competing priorities, very, very stressful, time for them in the last 12 months, just being bombarded with messages from technology vendors about solving this problem, solving that problem. So what I always say to people in everything is, it's just vitally important that you understand the target audience and you understand their position, and the particular problem that you're focusing on may well be a problem for them, but it might be number 25 in their list of priorities, and because of that, you're not going to get much attention. You're not going to get much traction. If you understand what their sort of top 2 or 3 problems are, and if your solution in some way contributes to solving those challenges or helping them, you're going to get a lot more traction. So I think a lot of people come into the industry, or they launch products, and they get very, and this is obviously something that tech entrepreneurs have to do, but they get very, very narrow in their focus. But I think it's really about understanding what the target audience are thinking and feeling, and the challenges that they're trying to solve, which will be much broader and much more strategic than the best video interviewing platform in the world ever, because it does X and Y. So I think it's that, and that's really also what I'm trying to do with my podcast. I'm trying to bridge that gap and let talent acquisition professionals and HR professionals really tell their story and talk about their priorities and talk about the challenges that they face. And I hope that that kind of helps the industry and helps the vendors really think about their solutions and how they're marketing them.
So if they get their, I suppose the research phase and being embedded in the community is what you're saying is.
Absolutely. But also I think it's important to understand where the community, what we mean by community. I think the other problem, and it's not just a problem in our industry, it's a problem in society as a whole, in every single industry. It can be very tempting to think that the community is the selection of the loudest voices. So, whether that's a Facebook group or whatever it is, that's not always representative of the community. Someone shouting loudly on social media isn't necessarily representative of all the issues within a particular industry. So I think people really need to do their research properly. They need to talk to a variety of different people and a variety of different companies to get a picture of what's going on. And things like industry Facebook groups are tremendously helpful and a great place to make contacts and full of useful information, but they don't always tell the whole story about how something works. And I think that's the same for the groups that are aimed at talent acquisition professionals as well. The amount of times I see people going in and saying, can anyone recommend a great ATS? We need a new ATS. Can you give us a new ATS? And it's like, well, the strategy that sits behind that and the understanding of the requirements and the problems that you want that ATS to solve are kind of critical, and you can't really just borrow someone else's experience because they happen to have implemented a new ATS. So I think, I think thinking strategically and doing research is just so critical.
Yeah, you kind of half stole my next question there. So I was going to ask you what they do on the TA side of things. So what type of things do you see them do well when they bring in a new piece of technology? What are they like? What does world class look like on that?
So I think you have to have a very, very clear strategy in place before you think about technology. I think that the very, very best people that I've interviewed are so clear on what they're trying to achieve as a team, what they're trying to achieve as an organization, how they're going to go about doing it, what resources they have in place, exactly how a technology is going to help them achieve that. At the same time, there are also people who do a lot of research in terms of understanding what's out there in the market and what's actually possible. And I think if you marry both of those things together, you're in a position where you're setting yourself up for success. You can select, you can look at your tech stack strategically, you can select vendors and the requirements in terms of the functionality of the software that you want to use, but also the type of vendor you want to deal with, what kind of support you need, what kind of thinking you need, what kind of integrations you need. So it really is the people who do that strategy piece first and also do their research to understand what the market looks like and where the market's going are the people who are the most successful. I think people who jump into this in a kind of a knee-jerk, well, we've got to use this and we need to use this, and someone said this was a good system, are probably not going to be as successful as people who really put time into that strategic thinking and time into their research, not just of the market right now, but where the market may be going in the next sort of 2 or 3 years. Because very often you're looking yourself into multi-year contracts with the solutions that you have. So you have to have something that is going to be fit for purpose for your business, but also for the way that the industry develops over that sort of 2 to 3 year period.
Tell me about that software product that you tried to launch. What was that?
I don't talk about this on interviews anymore.
I'm getting under your skin
I've
now.
really stitched myself up here, haven't I?
Yeah.
Yeah. So let me get the year right. This would have been going back to 2011, 2012. We launched a piece of mobile recruiting software. What it effectively did was it very allowed people to very quickly build mobile versions of their corporate career sites, because at the time, we were looking at the market, we were looking at the problems candidates were having. Mobile was becoming ubiquitous as a tool that job seekers were using, but companies just couldn't keep up, and we developed what I still think was an amazing platform that allowed quick development of mobile sites that were future proof and kind of went off into the distance of the future. We also had a brilliant roadmap that would have probably, had we been more successful, put us where some of the big kind of recruitment marketing platforms are now, who are all our kind of little niche mobile competitors at the time. But we were just we got some great initial traction, but we were too early. We were focused on something that was a problem, but something that wasn't perceived as a big enough problem for the clients to truly invest time in. So the upshot was we couldn't get funding to really scale it. So unfortunately we had to shut it, but it was a great 2 years, and we did provide some excellent services for the clients that we had in that time period.
If I can take you back to 2011 or even 2012, and you were in the thick of that, what would you do differently, knowing what you know now?
So I think that do you know what? It's difficult because you always do it in the context of a different time. So I think then the emphasis within technology companies was you had to scale massively. It wasn't about growing slowly and making a profit, then getting some investment. It was like, right, you need a minimum viable product, you need a few clients, and then you go for massive investment and scale quickly. And that's what we're trying to do. And I think if we hadn't done that, if we'd actually said, do you know what, we've got some great clients, let's get some more clients, let's get to a positive cash flow position, and then look at investment, I think we would have been successful. But we were going for that massive massive kind of explosive growth and explosive scaling, which looking back feels a bit ridiculous, but at the time it was what you did, and it was what investors look for. So I think it would be easy to say that I do things differently, and I certainly would now. Would I have been able to do things differently in 2011? Yeah. Different question.
Will you have another crack at something like that?
Well, at the moment, to be perfectly honest with you, I am focusing on the podcast. I'm focusing on developing out the platform, offering more value to the community in terms of insights and research, and that's really the business that I'm focusing on at the moment. So I'm 2 podcasts a week. I'm going to be announcing an event in a few weeks' time. I'm going to be doing research reports, all kinds of interesting things. So I'm very much focused on what I'm doing now.
Who should reach out to you to get on your podcast?
So if you are a talent acquisition leader or an HR leader and you are facing some interesting challenges, or you're using technology in an innovative way, then I'd really like to hear from you. Particularly if you're not someone who's spoken at a lot of conferences and we haven't heard your story before. One of the real kind of values of my podcast is I want to be as inclusive as possible. I want to find stories that we've not heard before and give them a platform to amplify some of the brilliant work that's kind of going on behind the scenes all over the world that doesn't necessarily get talked about on Facebook or in conferences.
And what's the easiest way to get hold of you, Matt?
If you go to recruitingfuture.com, You can find all my contact details there, or just reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find on LinkedIn.
All right. Matt Alder, everybody, thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you.